So howdy everyone, my name is Rogan Ferguson. I'm here with my colleague Dan Hellam over there. Dan's going to wave hi. He'll help me out with the presentation today. And we are program managers working on Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio Team Services. I want to thank everyone for coming out to the talk this afternoon. I think it's personally going to be the best talk, so you have chosen right. We are going to be talking about moving from Team Foundation Server to Visual Studio Team Services. So same spiel I said before, if you're here looking for TFVC to GitHub to VSTS, probably not the talk you want to be in. We're moving from Team Foundation Server to Visual Studio Team Services. And specifically, how can we move in a high fidelity fashion? And what I mean by that is how can we migrate and bring along all of our data? I know when I talk with a lot of customers, they often tell me, I would love to move to VSTS, but the big problem is I need to keep my change set history. I need to keep my commit history. I need to keep my work item history for a lot of requirements in my specific industry, either government regulation, state regulation, or any other myriad of things, business aspects in that sense. So we are going to be looking at actually running a real import live on stage using the TFS database import service for Visual Studio Team Services. And to save myself the tongue twister, I'm just going to call it the import service from now on. So if you hear me say import service, I'm referring to the big title up there on the screen. So first question I always get, why would I want to move from Team Foundation Server to Visual Studio Team Services? And I'm sure a lot of people in the crowd here probably maintain a TFS instance or have had to go through maintaining a TFS instance, upgrading it, keeping it up, dealing with issues that come in. And really the biggest thing is it gets you off having to manage all that. You save yourself a ton of time because you move all of that onto Microsoft's responsibility, but for us, keeping your account up and online. And we're going to be upgrading it every 3 weeks. So you're going to get the latest and greatest features every 3 weeks. All those new cool release definition stuff that we're bringing out, all the new cool build stuff, work items, agile planning boards, things you normally have to wait 3 to 4 months for and then go through an upgrade. You're going to save a ton of time and get it right away when everyone else gets it, and you can start leveraging it right from the start. So that's my biggest value prop there. Let's talk a little bit about how the import service actually works and what we're going to be seeing today. It's 6 easy steps, and I know I sound like an infomercial when I say that, but you will see this today when we go through it. The first 2 steps we're not going to cover very much. They're really about helping you guide the conversation with other people in your organization, so that way you can answer questions like, I'm a little bit nervous about moving to the cloud. What about security? How does VSTS treat everything? Those sections are really there to help you kind of facilitate those conversations and get everyone on board with importing. We'll talk a little bit about the upgrade, but most of this talk is going to be focused on the last 3 phases: validating, getting ready, and actually running the import. And we're going to be doing those today with the collection live on stage. So fingers crossed everything works. With that said, there's going to be a ton of demos here, so I'm not going to try to spend too much time on the slide deck. Hopefully give you guys some exciting stuff to send you on your way to the evening in downtown Orlando or wherever it takes you. Before we start, though, I do want to bring up one thing. I always get asked, what about other people that have done this? And I can tell you that hundreds of customers, enterprise, big to small, have moved from TFS to VSTS using the import service, including one that I'm sure everyone knows very well of, Shell, the oil and gas company. They moved a year ago 15 to 20 collections all the way to VSTS. They've completely got rid of their TFS infrastructure. And a lot of the engineers, when I talked with them, they would say, I would be at work on Friday, I would push my shelf set or push my commit up to TFS, and I come in on Monday, and it's like magic. I'm up there on VSTS, all my data's there, the commits I just pushed up, the check-ins I just did, the pull requests I still had open are there, and I just start working right away on day 1. So to kind of whet your appetite for this, I want to show you what the final product looks like, just so I can get across what I mean by we're bringing all of your data around.
Number 2, right?
Thank you, Dan. He's a very good button pusher.
This is all I do, push buttons.
He's here for you. All right, so what you're going to see on your left-hand side is going to be on-premises TFS. You can see that by the local host there. It's running on TFS 2017 Update 2. On the right-hand side is an account that's been imported. So right away I can see on my welcome page, my recent visits are kept. I can see the 3 projects that are there. Let's go ahead and jump into this Fabricam app project really quickly. And there are 3 things I want to quickly highlight. The first one is going to be the code. Let's go ahead and jump into that, because that's the question I get all the time. What about my code? Code is key. Code is important. If I look at my files, I can see that all my files are brought along. You'll notice the change dates stay the same. So remember, the left-hand side is going to be on-prem. The right-hand side is going to be hosted. I can see the It's the same there. The commit IDs are going to be the same as well, and the people that actually went and imported them are staying the same. I can look at the history for this, and you can actually see some of the differences between the new features, the new file explorer in VSTS that exists, and it isn't in TFS yet, so we can see that we're already getting some of those new features there. I can see the users that actually executed that. I can see the message that was done there. Everything stays the same. Even my pull request. If I had a pull request that was open before actually migrating, I can see that the comments are there, the code's there, the state that it's in is still there. So like I said, you can literally finish a pull request on Friday, get it up there, and then actually complete it in the cloud on Monday after your team has gone and migrated. Let's quickly check out the work. The big thing I get is these work items, they all have numbers. Some of them are very important and people have gone and done this. So if we dig into this one here, we can see that the work item numbers stay the same. And Dan, there's your first Star Trek joke of the day. It's starting. I am a big Star Trek fan. We can see the work item number stay the same. The user that it's assigned to stays the same. Again, we can see that contrast between the new features. We can see the older work item form on TFS, and you're already taking advantage of the newer work item form on VSTS. And this is going to remain the same for your builds, your releases, and everything else inside of this product. You're going to see all your build history from the beginning of time until now. Your build definitions will be brought along. So it's very easy for you to pick up and start working in VSTS very quickly. Now, I want to introduce you to my best friend, which is going to be the migration guide. You are going to hear me say the word migration guide so many times during this that I'm sure you're going to want me to stop in about 15 minutes. It is like bringing the textbook to the exam. It's like going back to college and you can bring the cheat sheet with all the answers there with you. This guide is written to help you go through these 6 easy steps to actually execute on a migration. So if I scroll down and look at the first phase, you can see that at the very start of everything, it's going to show me the list of tasks that I need to complete to be done with that phase. And it's going to go through that for every single one of them. I suggest that every time you go to do a migration from TFS to VSTS, that you go grab a copy of this guide, save it, and then you can go through it with you and your team, especially in the first 2 sections where you're trying to help facilitate a conversation about why you think it's important to move to the cloud and getting buy-off on it. And you can actually go ahead and check these off so you can kind of progress through the status as you're going. So again, go and check it. Like I said, it has great things like talking about security and compliance to help facilitating those discussions as well. One other thing I want to highlight from the migration guide that I get a lot, because we're not going to spend too much time on it in the talk, is when you're using the import service, you need to be on the 2 latest versions of TFS. That's going to include updates and RTW releases. So right now, we currently support TFS 2017 Update 2 and Update 1. When Update 3 comes out, Update 1 will no longer be supported. In general, we release new versions of TFS every 3 to 4 months, so you can expect that a given version of TFS will remain in support for about 6 months. All right, so that's one of the big things to kind of keep in mind is if you're on an older version, you need to upgrade. And don't worry, the migration guide has you covered. We provide a lot of tips and tricks, including the optimal path to upgrade from any version of TFS to the latest version that's going to be supported. And this is regularly being updated as we release new things. So this is going to get you on the way. All right, with that said, there's one more friend I want to introduce you to, my handy dandy friend, TFS Migrator. It is a client-side tool that you can download, and it assists you with your migrations, from everything from making sure the collection's ready to import, to preparing it for import, to the big final show, and actually queuing that import. We're going to be working a lot with this today, so you're going to hear me see TFS Migrator, migration guide a lot as we go through this talk. So let's jump into that first kind of import step, which is validating. So let's assume here we have a collection. It's on one of the supported versions of TFS. We're on 2017 Update 2. And I know that I've got sign-off from the rest of my organization. We're ready to go to the cloud. Well, the first step is going to be validating that this collection is OK to do. So we're actually going to be using TFS Migrator to help us do this. It has this nifty command called validate. You might ask me, what does it do? It's going to scan the collection. It's going to look for things that might stop you from migrating from TFS to VSTS. And it's going to tell you what you might need to correct, and then give you links to documentation to actually go fix those things prior to the migration. The most common thing I see that people need to fix are going to be process customizations. Dan's going to talk a lot more about this in a second, but simply put, customization support in TFS and VSTS, while they are starting to get similar, aren't quite the same. There are certain things in TFS you can do that we simply don't support in VSTS, and if you have those things, you will need to either remove them, or tweak the parameters to make sure it's okay to import to VSTS. So really this whole phase is about a rinse and repeat operation. Run validate, get a list of the complete list of errors, and then you're actually going to go fix those errors. We have documentation online, Dan will show you, that'll walk you through fixing basically every error you could get from this. Once that's done, you're good to go. Most customers don't get too many errors, and it might be an hour's work. Some customers get no errors. All right, so it's not too daunting of a task, and I'm going to hand off to my colleague now, and he's going to kind of walk you through that along with a demo.
Thank you, sir. Next slide. All right, so as Rogan alluded to, process customization is the hardest part when you come to validation. So, especially if you're on an old version of TFS. You started out with 2005, and you've updated over the years, but you haven't updated the process. And guess what? Right? You're going to have to do a bunch of work because the process templates have changed a whole lot in the last several years. And so before we kind of get into those mechanics, let's talk about the two different process models that are inside of VSTS. We have two models, right? One is called hosted XML, which is very similar to what you see today, right? It's a bunch of XML files that I can change and modify and do the things like I used to do in Power Tools. And so that's the first model. It's total legacy. Every time you import, we'll go out and we check all your projects out there, and you'll have a one-to-one mapping to each process. Very similar to the way it is today, right? If you make a change inside of TFS in process customization on a WIT, you're going to change it for every single project that's out there. It's the same kind of thing here in VSTS. And so if you've done any sorts of process customization whatsoever, you're going to fall into the hosted XML mode, right, for each project. Now, the other one is what we call inherited. Inherited is what we've been investing in over the last couple of years. If you're familiar with VSTS today, you will know that if you create a new project, everything you do with that is all inherited, right? I can go into the user interface, I can add new work item types, I can add new fields, I can play around with it. It's a heck of a lot easier than doing that old school WIT admin nonsense that you guys had probably used to in TFS. So how it works, when we run TFS Migrator, as Rogan was talking about, we go through and we do a validate, right? And the validate checks every single project. And when we check every single project, it looks through every one of those to see which one do you follow in. Do you follow in hosted XML? Do you follow into out-of-box inherited, right? If you, like I said, if you've done any process customizations whatsoever, if you added one field, you are going to be automatically hosted XML, okay? And then if you are out-of-box, if you're done the Agile, the CMMI, the Scrum, that'll fall into the inherited process. And so you can mix and match, right? We have a lot of customers who are like, you know what, I don't want any hosted XML, I don't want to deal with that, I only want to deal with the new stuff and do an Agile. Well, that's fine, but you just have to match 100% across the entire process. Okay. And so I have a little note there at the end. If you are using using XML today inside of TFS and you want it to match out of box, we have some PowerShell scripts that I'll walk you through to show you that you can actually change your process so it matches the out of box template, right? So you can imagine if I'm on 2010 and I updated over the years and I never updated a process, that 2010 process does not match what we have in 2017 or in VSTS. And so you're going to have to run a bunch of scripts to update them all to match them so they're legit, right? And so that's what the PowerShell scripts will do for you. The other thing you note is there's two logs when we run TFS Migrator. There is the TFS migration log, which is basically the first log that you look at to see if there's any problems, right? The very first thing you're going to want to do is when I run the validation and I'm checking for process validation errors is TFS Migrator will tell you, you know what, I'm going to check everything, and if anything's wrong with it, I'm going to let you know. So if you have problems within the XML in general, things are too old, the fields are not matching up, you have something wacky in there like for not rules or custom controls, it'll tell you. So that's the first log to check. Once that all passes, and if you have particular projects that you think that need to go onto inherited, that's where the try match out of box process log comes in. And that'll go through and it'll check all those ones that you think that are going to be good for out of box. It'll let you know that, you know what, you're pretty close, but you need to make a couple adjustments. And if you make these adjustments, it'll land in out of box. So if everything passes 100% in TFS Migrator log, you can come into VSTS, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your processes are going to land into an out of box process, to inherited. Okay? So some of the common errors that we run into are, a lot of them are things like, hey, I'm missing portfolio backlogs in my configuration, right? So again, if you're using something that's old in 2005, in 2008, and 2010, those didn't exist. So a lot of those are relevant for when you've come from an older version of TFS, you've updated your TFS instance over time, but you never updated your process templates. That's where your problems are going to be. And these can be fixed a lot of times using the update after, what do we call it? Configure features after upgrade. And so you can actually go inside of TFS and open up the project, and there's a little box there that says, hey, update your process, and then you can go ahead and do that. And I'll show you how that works here in a minute. Other things that are common are things like user or user group are not supported. And this is in reference to when I have a process, and I can have a process per project, but then I can also create projects additional on that process, right? So if I have a process A that's used in project 1, I create a new project that wants to use that process, I can't refer back to a group that is scoped to the project. So if I'm using rules in there, they need to be scoped to the account, to the collection. So you can't have project scoped rules. So that's another one that commonly comes up. For not rules are one that's in general that we don't necessarily support. Now that one's a little loosey-goosey. If you guys are a big organization and you're trying to move over and you need for not rules, those are one you can actually contact us on and we can have a conversation with you on how we can enable those potentially. But it's out of the box is not supported. Some other ones are things like custom controls are not supported. That model is completely different in VSTS with extensions. Other things that are not supported are like custom link types. If you're using custom link types, you got to get rid of those. Those are not supported out of box. Okay. And then we also do other things like limits. So you can imagine that some big organizations over time have gone and added a whole bunch of work items or work item types, or they've added a whole bunch of fields. We put limits on those so you don't get too much, right? If we have too many, we allow too much of that, a lot of times the experience kind of degrades when you're up in the service, and so we put limits in there to prevent like doing too much, basically. All right, so let's step through it. So the very first thing I'm going to do, everybody see that okay? Is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run TFS Migrator. I'm going to run a validate on it, and I'm going to go ahead and check my collection to see if it's legit. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And one thing you'll notice here is I have an extra command on here, maybe, is this thing called save processes. So what this does is it's optional, is when I go ahead and run the migration tool, it's actually going to go out, it's going to go extract the process from every project and check it and then keep it on disk for me. So if I need to make a change to it, I can make it on disk and then rerun WIT-admin to fix it, okay? And a lot of times we'll have customers who are like, hey, I've done this thing, I don't understand what the problem is. The first thing we ask them, do the /save process, so you can send us a process so we can look at it and see what the heck the problem is, right? And so this helps quite a bit with that. So we'll go ahead and run it. And this just takes a minute to kind of run through. It's a pretty small collection at this point. Runs through each of the projects, so it extracts the data, runs through the checks, checks each project to see if it's legit. It's a little bit slower than I would expect. It's usually pretty quick. And if I scroll up here, you can see the nice, beautiful red that we have a problem with our project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside those logs, and we're going to take a look at it. So here I have my logs. You can see here that, and obviously every time we run this, it's going to create a new folder for the log. And you can see here that I have a whole bunch of processes as well as the log files. And what did we say before? The first thing we want to check is the TFS Migrator log. So let's open that one up. And we're going to open up in code so it's a little bit easier to read. Maybe. Okay. And so I'm going to kind of flip through these. Now there's a lot of errors in here that you'll notice are kind of like information type warnings. What's wrong with your machine here, Rogan?
Internet, probably.
Come on, baby. Come on. It's going to be a short demo. Yikes. So, because of latency here. So what we've done is we've run through each of those projects, and you can see that we get a whole bunch of errors. Right? And so this particular error is actually pretty straightforward. It's actually because what happened was I have a field that's a system field that is no longer legit. It doesn't have the right values to it, and so it's not formatted in the right way. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and update that field using a WIT-admin change field command. And so how I know that is you can see, hopefully I can at least scroll sideways. Boy, this stinks. Come on.
You just need the dial-up sound now, and it'll be perfect.
Yeah. Where was that network guy? So you can kind of see there on the right side where it has the actual air number. Okay? And so there's a website that we have out there that will allow you to go ahead and use that number. This is going to be a bad demo. So I've looked up that number. It's the same one here where it shows the TF42025556 or whatever it is. And we have all these error messages that are laid out that you most commonly will run across. And so now I know exactly what the problem is. And here it's because I have a field that's not formatted correctly. So I need to go ahead and change that. And so it's pretty easy to do. So here I'm going to go ahead and grab the command real quick. So in this case, because I know it's a system field, and I know that all those error messages are basically going to be, once I change the field once, it'll go ahead and fix them all at the same time. So I can go ahead and do that. So let's just do a quick CD. And we are going to basically, so at this point here, what I'm doing is I'm getting in to go to my instance where my widadmin command is, and now I'm going to actually run the command, which is basically widadmin change field. I'm going to change it on the collection, and I'm going to basically just change the name from iteration ID, which didn't have a space, to the one that does have a space. Now this is actually, the reason I put this one in here is if you are on an old version of like 2005 or 2010 and you upgraded over the years, you'll see this a lot, right? Because we name things differently before than we name them now. And if you haven't upgraded your process, you're just going to get a ton of errors. But the good news is once you change the field once, it'll fix every single project because fields are scoped across the entire collection. So let's go ahead and run this real quick.
Will that also update your queries and stuff so they still work?
So the question was, will that update my queries so they all work? And the answer is yes. Yes, they will. So widadmin automatically just, that's the magic of widadmin, I guess. So now it's just checking to make sure I'm cool with making the change. I made the change, and let's go ahead and rerun this. So we just go back to F. And we're going to rerun the TFS migrator. Try it again. So it's going to rerun. Now, in this particular scenario, we still have errors. But we do now have another folder. So let's see if it's finished. So you can see we went ahead and finished, but it's still going to result in a couple errors because there's a couple errors that I know of that need to be validated. So let's go ahead and open it up one more time. This thing is brutal, dude. All right. So there's the file. We'll open this up maybe just in here.
Because I should tell everyone to stop tweeting right now. Save on bandwidth.
Yeah, it makes a hard demo when you can't do anything. So we'll eventually get down there, and you can see that now I don't have all those errors, but it keeps bouncing around, so I'm doing a poor job of showing it to you. So you can see that all the other validations basically passed, but I still have a couple errors in there left. So one of them, as you scroll a little bit further down, you see several projects passed just fine, but then we still have some errors in one of the projects. Now, I'm not going to go through fixing all these just because of the error issue or the network connections that we have. But one thing you'll notice in there is this one that's another common one. This process configuration, required element bug items, is not showing up in the configuration. And this is a direct result from upgrading over the years, but not upgrading your process. So let me show you how that works real quick. I hope. So here is the project. I'm going to go ahead and open up, I believe it was the Fabricam app. And we will go into configuration. And notice the little box over on the left, configure features, right? That's one that you can go ahead and run, and it'll go ahead and try to fix these for you automatically. Now, again, if you are on a old version and you haven't done this over the years, sometimes this will completely fail on you, right? It's just a matter of you upgraded it over and over again in the years, but you never upgraded the process, and it really doesn't know what to do because your stuff is so old. So we'll go ahead and just verify this and run it. Here it's going to go ahead and add that bug's behavior to my configuration file. I'll verify, I'll configure, and it'll go ahead and close it out, and now it's been basically resolved. Now, I could just go into the configuration file inside the XML and fix it and run it, and that would be fine too. But this is a lot easier. Now, the downside with this is if you have hundreds of projects, guess what you get to go do, right? You get to go to each and every one of those and fix them. And unfortunately, we don't have a better way of doing it. But it's a lot easier than kind of playing with the XML. One more thing I was just going to show you. I'm not going to try to run this just because I'm worried that the network is just going to be too slow to kind of go through it. There is a GitHub project out there that we have that's called process configuration. What do we call this actually? What's the repo name? It's called process customization scripts. If you go to GitHub/Microsoft, it's in there. And basically what this is this is a project that contains a couple PowerShell scripts. It also contains, if we go into import, it'll give you the out-of-box processes as well that you can go ahead and apply. So we have the Agile, CMMI, and Scrum. And if I run the configuration file against my collection and a project, and I say I want to use that particular Agile or Scrum, it'll go ahead and take all the widths that it should be and apply those into your project on your TFS on-prem. Okay, so that's how you basically upgrade it. Now, of course, if you have a bunch of customizations in there that you want to try to overwrite, you're going to have to delete fields with admin. It's not going to do that for you, but it's going to upgrade you along the way if you haven't customized it, but you just have an old process. Okay? So I'll take questions afterwards. I know I didn't go through everything here just because of the way this is reacting, but we'll be around for questions if you have any questions here afterwards. Like I said, the biggest pain in the neck is process configuration. If you have a big collection that has a ton of projects and you haven't done anything over the years, you're going to have to go through these one at a time and fix them, and it becomes a real pain in the neck. The scripts that we have will help with a lot of that, but the reality is you still have to go through them and try to fix them up. So go ahead, Rogan.
No problem. All right, thank you, Dan. Just going to minimize this out. And for the rest of the demo, I'm going to be doing it on my laptop, so we will not have network errors like we had with the VM machine right there. Anyways, let's continue. So we have a collection now. It's been fixed. It's passing a validate. Now we need to move on to the next step. I know everyone wants to run really quickly to when we hit the import. Not quite yet. We need to actually go ahead and get ready to import, and that's going to require generating a couple of files. So just like the validate command in TFS Migrator, it has a nifty-difty command called prepare. What does prepare do? Well, it's going to run another validate. And people always ask me, why does it do that? Sometimes when I work with customers, they might go a week between getting a successful validate and running a prepare, and you never know what can happen. A new data shape could get introduced, a new process customization could come into place, and we just want to be overly cautious to make sure that we catch these things when you're doing it. If that passes, though, it's going to generate two files. The first file is going to be called the import specification file, so cleverly nicknamed by the engineers on my team, import.json. So if you hear me say that, that's what I mean, the import specification file. This file, we're going to get more into it when we actually go to queue the import. Basically, it says, here's my data, here's where I want it to go, and a couple extra parameters to customize it as you see fit. The other one, the one we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about here that I get a ton of questions on, is the identity mapping file and how my identities are mapped when I do the import. When we do the demo, we're going to crack open this file, and I'm going to explain to you how we actually go about doing the identity mapping process and some tips and tricks on how you can troubleshoot issues that you might have when you get this identity mapping file itself. Before we jump into it right away, I want to call out 3 quick things on actually using the identity import. Number 1, we do not support Microsoft accounts. Think of those as at Outlook or at hotmail.com. You need to be using Azure Active Directory, also known as AAD. And in order for users to be imported correctly, you're going to need to have an Azure AD Connect set up. That is basically a directory sync between your on-premises Active Directory, AD, and your Azure Active Directory, AAD. If your organization is using Office 365, you more than likely have this already in place because Office 365 generally predicates that you have Azure AD Connect running. And we'll talk more about the troubleshooting in just a minute here. So let's hop into a demo. All right, so I have TFS Migrator up on the screen. We're going to run that validate command. So just like Dan showed you a second ago, I'm just going to invoke TFS Migrator. I'm going to type in the prepare command, and I'm going to point it at my collection. Since this is on my local box, I'm just going to point it at localhost, TFS, and it's the Fabricam collection. Now, there are 2 additional parameters that are going to be required for running the prepare command. The first one is going to be the expected region that you want to import your account into. This is done because there's some configurations that are placed in that import specification file that help us when we go to run the import. I'm going to put a code here that's going to be CUS. That stands for Central United States. If you remember back to that migration guide in phase one of the tasks you're going to do is decide where are we migrating to. Is it going to be Europe, the United States, Australia, Canada? I would definitely love to go to Canada. I'm from there, just not in the wintertime. But it will give you these codes that you can go to fill in. So as part of the workbook exercises you'll do in there, you will already know what that code's going to be that you're going to place there. I know I'm going to go to Central US today, so I'm going to go ahead and put CUS. The other parameter I'm going to get, I'm going to write it out here really quickly. It is the tenant domain name. And for this demo, we're going to be pointing it at the Microsoft one. Now, I get the question, what does this mean? This is pointing us towards your Azure Active Directory. Because this account that I have on my laptop is backed by the Microsoft AD, I want to import against the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, so I'll be able to add other people from my company into the collection. 99% of the time, that tenant domain name, if you take your corporate email and look after the @ symbol, you can grab that and put it in there. So if I worked for Fabricam and my email was rogan@fabricam.com, I can grab that ending part and put it in the tenant domain name, and that should work perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and execute this command. It's going to look just like a normal validate, except for one additional thing. I'm going to get this pop-up window here. I need to sign into AAD so that way we can try to find matching users. I'm going to quickly sign in, and while it's running, we'll explain what it's actually doing behind the scenes. And if we're lucky, you'll get to watch me take a phone call to do two-factor authentication. Anyone have the odds on T-Mobile working in Orlando? Going once. Oh, got the phone call. And there we go. So it's going to start to run a validate. What it's going to do behind the scenes as the validate passes is it's going to scoop up a list of every user in your collection that has any permission. So if the user has any permission to your collection, it's going to scoop up that list. It's going to grab the SID, or the security identifier for that user, and it's going to try and find the matching user in AAD and put that into the identity mapping file so you can see what the expected identity import state is going to be. So let's take a look really quickly at this. We can see that if I scroll up, the validation passed, and as such, it went and generated those files that we talked about. One thing I did on purpose that I want to call out here is that TFS Migrator will let you know when newer versions are available. I purposely made sure I didn't grab the latest and greatest one. Please make sure when you're doing this, if you see this pop up, that you go download that, use that version. We're constantly making new updates to make the experience better, as well as detecting new errors or maybe automatically fixing errors that you no longer need to fix that this one might be calling out. There's one additional thing. I think it's a message for you, Dan. Something about Star Trek. I don't know what's going on. Must be a bug or something. I guess we'll have to file a bug.
It's definitely a bug.
Definitely a bug. All right, let's go ahead and look at those files that got generated. So just like before when Dan was looking at the TFS Migrator.log, I can go into the logs folder for TFS Migrator, look at my current set of logs. I have all the logs you'd expect, that TFS Migrator.log, but I have these two additional files. Let's open up the import.json really quick. I don't want to go too much into this because we're going to fill it out when we hit the import step. I just want to expose you to it here. And like I said, it's a very simple file. It's going to let you say where your source data is, where you're going to go with your data, what account do you want it to be imported into. It's important to note that when you're using the import service, we create a brand new account every single time we actually go and import. So you need to make sure you pick a name that isn't used, and I'll explain how you can figure that out when we get to the import step. There's a couple of additional properties that are here. The import type, and again, we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in just a second. There are two types of imports you can run, a dry run and a production run. And there's also this import code. This is something that's going to be going away very soon. We're currently in a preview for this tool. You can get that. Step one will tell you how to go get that in the migration guide. It's a very quick process to get the code. But all you need to know is that it's going to be going away very soon, so you won't have to worry about this field coming up. The other one is this validation data. This is data that's generated by TFS Migrator. You don't have to touch it at all. It's going to be important, though, to making sure your import runs successfully. You notice it's checksummed. Please don't change it. If you change it, TFS Migrator will not be happy. It'll frown a little bit. All right? So make sure you keep that the same. Just don't touch it. It's there to help you drive your import. All right, let's look into the file that I know everyone's been itching for me to open, which is the identity mapping file. It's also the one I generally get oh so many questions on. And let me expand these out, and then let's have a conversation about how this whole identity import stuff works. Perfect. Now I'm going to ask the basic question. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Can everyone see this okay? Does it need to be bigger, smaller perhaps? Bigger? All right, I will go one notch up. How does that look? Getting there? No? All right, I'm going to go with this. Let me know if you need it to be any bigger. The most important column in this entire file is going to be this status column over here. This is going to be your indication to how these identities are going to be imported. There's two ways they can be imported. Let's talk about the OK column. OK means that we expect your identities to be imported actively. And by actively, I mean that they had a membership in your collection on-prem, so they were members, they'd done some history, they had permissions to access your collection, and post-import they'll be able to sign in with their AAD identity, and everything that they owned on-prem will now belong to their AAD identity. This is generally the state that most people want their identities to be in when they've completed an import. The other identities, the ones that show up as no match, are going to be imported historically. Simply put, we're just going to copy across their display name, and that's what's going to be tagged for all their history. Everything for work items, everything for check-ins, chain sets, pull requests, you name it. It's just going to be the display name. And another question I commonly get, if you don't see a user in here, like let's say I worked at this company 6 years ago, I'd done a lot of history, but I no longer work at the company, so clearly I don't have permissions in this collection. Any users historically that are no longer a member of your collection will automatically be imported historically, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, the question I get is, what happens if I have a user that's marked as a no match, but I need them to be a match? When you run an Azure AD Connect, it takes the SID of your on-prem AD identity, and it's going to put it into a property called the on-premises security identifier in the matching AAD identity. That is how we are telling which user will be mapped to what user. When I look at myself over here, let's look at this Roferg column. I can see that my on-prem AD identity is North America WAC Roferg, and I can see there's my SID. It's going to be TFS Migrator looked for that matching SID in that parameter in AAD, and it found a matching user, and that is going to be Roferg at Microsoft.com, and that's the identity I'm going to sign in with. It's super duper important. I cannot stress this enough. We're actually making changes to the identity mapping file very soon. You cannot edit that user principal column. Think of this as a log. It's showing you what we're expecting you to get, and you can rerun prepare as many times as you want after you've done some fixes. If you do manual edits there, it's not going to be respected. All right, so think of this as a log. So if I look up at the top and I wanted that bootcamp user to be included, well, the first thing I would say is, one, talk with your AAD admin. A lot of times I see new people start at companies, the sync doesn't run very often, maybe once a week, and all you need to do is wait until the sync runs and they're totally good to go. Other times you're going to need to do a little bit of digging. The first thing I suggest checking is see if there's that matching identity in AAD that you expect to be there. If that's there, check that on-premises security identifier property, and this is all covered in the migration guide, by the way, and see if it's there. If it's null, then you know you need to make sure you need to figure out what's going on with the sync. If it's not null, then you need to see why is it conflicting, why is that SID different from what the on-prem user has. Once you do that, you can rerun this command and it will regenerate the list and you'll be able to see what the state of things are. Another thing that you'll see in this mapping file is going to be the licensing column. Here's what I'm going to tell you now. Don't worry about touching that. We are actually going to be removing it in a couple weeks. There is a grace period when you import the team services. We will give you free licenses. So for dry runs, don't worry about it. You'll have free licenses for the existence of the dry run account. For production runs, when you're ready to have your forever account, we are going to give you a grace period until the first of the next month to get situated and figure out what you want with licensing. You will never be charged for the licenses you're given on import, but you will have to the first of the next month to go tie a subscription to your account and decide how many licenses you want to purchase and how you want everyone configured. All right, so for now, just ignore this column. It's something that's going away. Instead, focus on the status column and making sure that the users you expect to be mapped as active are being mapped as active. Whew. All right, that's about the most complicated part of this prepare demo. Let's move on to, I'm sure, the moment everyone has been waiting for. I mean, I know I've been waiting for this all day. And that is import. Actually queuing this thing and getting it up into the cloud. Before we get there, though, I did mention to you that I owed you an explanation of what these two terms meant. We have a dry run and a production run import. A dry run, as the name alludes to it, is a test import. And I'm going to stress this really hard without sounding like I'm going to beg. Please, 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 please run a dry run import. When I'm looking at the telemetry that's coming in and I see people, we call them shotgun imports. They go straight to production import. And then I see that they delete the account, and then I email them, and they go, well, there were some things we didn't think about that we need to take care of. Doing a dry run import gives you a chance in a very safe space to A, validate that all the data got copied over the way you did, that your users got imported the way they did. Why was Bob not imported as active? We should go figure that out. We didn't notice that. It also gives you a chance to identify any unique post-import steps that belong to your corporation. We provide a lot of instructions on what you should do post-import in the migration guide, but time and time again when I talk with customers, they all have different processes. I need to work with IT to get certain firewall ports open so that way I can have the VSTS communicate with my build agents. I need to make sure that's taken care of. I didn't see that. I never thought about that. You know, sometimes they can have a couple hours of self-validation that they need to do. These are things that you can think out and plan out in a very safe environment in a dry run. Dry run accounts are limited term accounts. They're only going to stay around for 15 to 21 days. After that, they'll be automatically deleted. The reason we do that is most people will finish, A, they'll finish their validation within that 15 to 21 day period. B, if they can't finish it within that time period, then it is important that you do another dry run import. Remember, your collection is live. It's constantly changing shape. New data shapes are introduced, new process customizations are coming in, so it's always good if you've gone a long period of time between imports to do another import just to make sure that everything's still going fine. Production imports, straightforward. The account exists forever unless you decide to delete it. I certainly hope you don't. It's going to stay around. That's the thing you type in when you are sure you are ready to go and you are going to be working on that account on Monday and you're not going to be rolling back. Again, please do a dry run first. I don't like to see shotgun imports. All right, let's talk about what we need to do to actually get this ready because we've done a whole bunch of preparation stuff. We're going to do a little bit of a light overview, then we'll jump right into it. So, step one, you need to take the collection offline. You must attach it. If you're doing a dry run, I can understand that you might not want to take the collection offline. You can use what's called an offline detach, where you take a copy of the configuration database and a copy of your collection database, and you can use the TFS admin tooling to actually create a detached collection. And we have this all in the migration guide as well, so you can find it there. But for production imports, I highly recommend you detach it and you keep it offline the entire time. There's no technical reason to keep it offline the entire time. The only thing is, remember, we're dealing with a one-shot thing. We are moving your entire collection. So if you have developers that are still pushing commits in, changing work items, you're going to have to go redo all that once the import finishes. And most of the time, import's big game day is going to be on the weekend. So hopefully those people are out, enjoying it with their families while you're sitting there importing and enjoying the loveliness that will be the status screen we'll see in a few minutes. The other thing is you're going to need to figure out how to share your data with us. We have two methods for doing this. We have a DAC pack, which is just a data to your application backup, and you can provide us a connection string to a virtual machine sitting in Azure. I'll tell you right now, the DAC pack method is preferred because it's very easy for you to do to generate those, and it's very easy for you to hand it off to us, and we can pull it right into VSTS. There are some scaling limitations with DAC packs. If you get above 150 gigs in size, in terms of database size, then you will need to go and use the VM import method. I get this question next a lot. How do I know if I'm over 150 gigs? What should I be looking at? TFS Migrator is going to tell you if you need to use the VM method. So if TFS Migrator doesn't complain to you, use the DAC pack method. If not, you're going to need to set up a VM to do this import, and the migration guide has you covered. There's a whole list of things to let you know what you need to do. Now, unfortunately, I won't have time today in this demonstration to do that, so despite my manager's objections, I spent an obscene amount of time, and it didn't save the font correctly, making a very pretty slide that explained how this worked. You can imagine that the first step would be on your virtual machine, you would go ahead, on your regular production TFS instance, excuse me, you detach your collection, you move it to the cloud, and it looks just like a question mark the whole time. I don't know why. The cloud's just one giant question mark. Once it's on that machine, and by the way, it's copying it to that machine, there's various approaches you can take. You can just take it and copy it through a storage account to the machine. You can do log shipping, continuous backups. We have links to instructions on that in the migration guide to help you out there. Pick one that suits your needs. You're going to attach it, or restore it, pardon me, onto that machine. You're going to go ahead and configure a SQL login for that machine. And of course, we also provide details on how you can lock down the firewall for that machine to ensure that only Visual Studio Team services can get access to that SQL database. You'll fill out your import.json, you'll kill the import, and then this question mark magically moves to the other question marks, and everyone is happy. All right, let's jump into this and get this going. Thank you, Dan. You're a very good button pusher. All right, so let's start with step number 1. Let's go ahead and detach this collection. So I'm going to go ahead here. I certainly do have backups. That's actually a lie, I don't. And it's going to do a validation. I'm going to detach. The reason we need to detach is when you're talking about an on-premises TFS instance, there is a configuration database, and then you can have n number of collection databases underneath it. The configuration database contains data that is relevant to the import, specifically the identities. And when you detach a collection, it actually scoops that data up, packages it in the collection, so that way we can ship it along with it. Normally that's used for moving that TFS collection from one instance to the other, but in this case we're using it to get that data in here to package it up and move it to VSTS. All right, so I can see that finished successfully, so I'm going to go ahead and complete it. So step 1 is taken care of, because it's never fun to get all the way to where you queue the import and realize you forgot to detach the collection. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create that DAC pack itself. Now, I am going to use SQLpackage.exe. It is a tool that's generally included with the SQL Server install, or if you install SQL Server Management Studio. We also provide links on how to go install this tool separately, so you don't need to go install all of SQL to actually run it. And it's going to help us generate this DAC pack. Now, traditionally, DAC packs are only schema. They don't include the data. So if you try to go and run this command from SQL Server Management Studio, it's going to produce a DAC pack that just has schema, and that's absolutely useless to us when we run the import. So I recommend please use this method. It is much faster, and literally you're just going to be copying this command. In the migration guide, it gives you this entire command. The only things you need to fill out are 1, the connection string to your particular instance, 2, the collection you are targeting, and 3, what you want to save it as. In this case, I want to save it to my C Ignite import folder and call it tfs_fabricam.dacpack. And you can see there's this additional flag that says to extract the table data as well along with the schema. So I'm going to go ahead and get this running, because it's going to take a couple seconds to actually go ahead and generate that DAC pack. And we're going to go open up that nifty-difty import.json, and we are going to actually start to fill it out. So let me see, I'm going to go Ignite, TFS Migrator, Logs, Fabricam, and I'm going to go copy these 2 things. I'm going to move them to a directory that'll make my life a little bit easier. Perfect. And I'm going to go open up this import.json. Oh, and I forgot I had it open on this screen right here. So the first things we're going to do, I'm not going to touch that location thing. We're going to get to it in just a sec. That's actually going to be the last thing that we fill out. Let me just move this over to this virtual desktop. I am going to rename the DAC pack. Now, you would not believe how many times we get it right. We try to be smart and default it to default collection. 9 times out of 10, that's generally okay. I'm going to go ahead and call this Fabricam, because I know that's what I'm calling my backup. I'm going to provide an account name. Now, if you're not sure if an account name is available or not, because remember, we're creating a brand new account every time we run this import, you can always open up a web browser, type in whatever name you want, .visualstudio.com. If you go to 404, the name hasn't been taken. You can go ahead and use it. A common question I get is, how can I go and reserve a name? I'm really dead set on calling my account Star Trek at visualstudio.com. Well, what I suggest you do, and what the migration guy suggests you do, is at the start of the import process, actually go ahead and just go create an account on visualstudio.com called startrek.visualstudio.com. Hold on to it. Do your dry runs, do your production runs to some other name, Star Trek-import, Star Trek-test, and then when you're actually done your production import, you can do a name swap to kind of get a hold of that. So you're kind of account squatting for a while to get the name you want. For this one, I'm going to keep it nice and simple. I'll just use my lovely alias, and I'll call it that. The type of import, that we're going to be doing is going to be a dry run today. We're going to keep it nice and easy. And as I mentioned before, that import code is going away very soon. Step 1 of the migration guide explains how to get that. But of course, I have cheated, and ahead of time I went and got this code for this demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and place it right here. So this gets us almost all the way there. The only thing we have to deal with is this actual location parameter, which we're going to get to when we upload the data here. Let's check on that DAC pack now. I can see the DAC pack's finished. I'm going to go open up the folder, and I can see it's there. Now, when you're using the DAC pack method for importing, you're going to be putting them into blob storage containers. And you're going to create what's called a shared access signature, a SAS key. And that's basically delegated access key to the particular blob container. So you can scope it to expire after a certain number of days and give us minimum access permissions to that as well. And you're going to be putting your DAC pack, and you're going to be putting your identity mapping file in that storage container. Now, I suggest that you use a tool such as a Storage Explorer to make your life a lot easier. I'm going to start the copy here, and we'll talk a little bit about this. And we can see it is queuing to upload, so hopefully it won't take too long. Hopefully the network's going to work with us. And it's going to upload it here. So all I went and did before this was I went to the Azure portal, created a storage account, created a blob container underneath it, and then I just connected to it from the Storage Explorer here, and I'm uploading it. A quick pro tip: if your DAC pack is larger than 10 gigs, and the migration guide recommends this, I highly suggest that you go ahead and use azcopy.exe. It's a command line tool to actually go and execute copies to and from storage accounts in Azure. The reason I suggest that is it does a multi-threaded upload, so it's much faster. So if you have a really large DAC pack, you can shave off maybe potentially 40 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, depending on how big it is. For us, though, it's going to work out perfectly fine here because this isn't too big of a file. It's only about, I think, about 57 megabytes if I look at it again. So let me see. We can see our DAC pack and our identity mapping file are up there. Now, we come to the business of generating that shared access signature so we can go ahead and queue the import. Please, 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 please do not use the Azure portal to do this. You can generate a SAS key on the Azure portal. The problem is it creates a storage account wide SAS key to give someone delegated access to all of your containers and file blobs underneath it. We don't want, number one, I want to make sure you have as scoped set of SAS key as possible, so you're just giving us access to that one storage container. Number two, I see a lot of customers that have multiple imports. They'll create one storage account. They'll create container 1, container 2, container 3 for each individual collection. And if you give us a SAS key that's scoped at the storage container level, we're going to have to go look in each container. We might find conflicting file names. So we need to make sure it's generated at a container level. And this is why I recommend using a Storage Explorer like the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer, because all I can do is once I connect to that storage account, so my Ignite import storage account, I can expand out the blob containers. I can click on the Ignite blob container, right click, get shared access signature. All I need to give is list and read permissions. We don't need anything else. I recommend that you provide at least 7 days of access for the key before it expires. You can do less, but 7's good in case you want to do multiple attempts. That looks good. Click Create, and it's going to go ahead and give me a URL. All I have to do is click Copy, and then I can open up my import.json, and I can replace it in this location bit. Now, if you had generated this key from the Azure portal, what would have happened is this Ignite bit that is here after the whack at the end would not actually be there. It would just be, it would look like this, because it would be a storage account wide key. So I'm going to go ahead and save. We'll take one more look. We got everything in place. Everything looks good. I think we're ready to go ahead and queue this import. So the big moment we've all been waiting for. So just like every other command on TFS Migrator, is TFS Migrator import. Now, because this is running basically off that import specification file, you don't have to run this command from a machine that is TFS installed or have access to your production database instance. You can run this from any machine you want. It's perfectly fine. I'm going to point it at where my import.json or the import specification file is currently located. So I know that it's going to be in my C ignite, if I can type, import folder import.json. I'm going to hit enter. What it's going to do is it's going to run a validation, a very quick validation on that import.json file, and really it's just trying to check and see if, you forgot to fill something out. It's also going to try and connect to that storage account to make sure those two files you told us about are there and that it can get access to it. It's then going to prompt me with a lovely display that's going to let me know that you are about to execute and import the Visual Studio Team services. And I'm going to ask you guys, do you want me to say yes or no? Do it. All right, there we go. I'm glad no one said no, because then I would have to not do it. So I'm going to say yes. It's going to start the import. I'm going to get that login prompt. Now, the person who queues the import, the identity that queues the import, will be the person that owns the account. So in this case, I'm going to sign in with my personal identity at Microsoft. So my rofrig at Microsoft.com identity will end up owning this account. You can change that post-import. It's really quickly. You just go to the settings on the account and go, whoop, I don't want this person to be the owner anymore. So just keep that in mind. The person that queues it is going to own it. And you're also going to want to sign in with a user that's in the same AAD that you generated that identity mapping file on, because the import process will automatically back your VSTS account with that AAD. So in this case, my VSTS account that I get at the end of this will be backed by the Microsoft directory. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And I might get lucky. It might not want me to 2FA this time. Oh, nice. There we go. We don't have to test T-Mobile again to see if it works in Orlando. So it'll take a couple seconds. Boom, queued the import. It's off and on its way. You'll notice when you run a dry run import, it automatically adds a -dry run to the end of your account name. That is only on dry runs. Your production run will have whatever name you asked it to have there. So this is going to be running. The user that queued the import is going to get an email. All right, that email is going to tell me that the import started. I'm also going to receive an email when the import finishes. The next question I get is, well, I have a bunch of stakeholders and we want to know when the account is ready for us to use. And we just this week, I mean literally as in yesterday, so fingers crossed it works, added a very beautiful status page. I know I'm hyping it up, and I better hope it's there. Oh, no. Okay, I'm gonna give it a second. Otherwise, I'm gonna write a very nice email to my engineers and be like, "It was there last night, I swear." It can take a couple of minutes for that status page to come up because we have to create that account. So when you're trying to hit the account, until that account is actually created, we don't get that status page. So I'm gonna give it a couple seconds, cross my fingers, and hope it's there. In the meantime, I'm more than happy to take any questions that people might have. We've got plenty of time at the end. I'm sure everyone's itching to ask me everything. Or stare at me blankly. That works too.
How long did you say the dry runs last?
So the question was, how long do the dry runs last? They last between 15 to 21 days, and that's going to be based on the number of users that you have at the import time. So the minimum is 15, the maximum is 21. Awesome. So the question was, I have a really old TFS instance, and I have some projects that I don't want to bring, I don't necessarily want to delete, but I don't want to bring with me. This is a collection move, so we don't have a way to do that, but what I would suggest in your situation is to split the collection on the line of the projects that you don't want to import and the projects you do want to import. So effectively, for those that aren't familiar with the collection split operation, you take a backup of that particular collection, and then you attach them both, and in one you delete out the projects you don't want to keep, and the other you delete out the projects that you do want to keep, and you end up with a copy A that has half of them and copy B that has the other half. Yes? Do we plan to also support Bitbucket? So right now this is just going to be for TFS to VSTS, but with Bitbucket, I believe it's just using Git behind the scenes. So you can do a Git import. We have a Git import feature when you go, if you go VSTS Git import, you can do that. You can also just pull down the repo, change the remotes to point at the VSTS repo that you create, and you can push it up there. Is the status page not coming up, Dan?
Not yet.
Very sad face for the engineers when I send them the email after this. It looked absolutely beautiful. So I will go back and put up the slides real quick because I just want to call out one or two more things, and I will certainly continue to take questions. Number one, where you upload your data matters. If you're going to the United States, please don't stick your data in Australia. I say that, and you might think I'm being sarcastic. Someone did that. I don't know why. Please don't do that. It makes it very slow. The migration guide will tell you where you should put your data based on where you're importing. Always delete previous attempts. You need to delete those previous dry runs before you can do the next one or your production run. So if you finish before the validation, before the dry run expiry period is over, just go ahead, delete it the normal way you would from the account settings. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. Me and my team answer them very quickly. VSTS data import at Microsoft.com. Last but not least, my best friend, the migration guide. There's a lovely QR code so you can go grab it. If not, you can just go to also known as .ms whack TFS import, or just search TFS VSTS migration and you will find the webpage with this guide available. Make sure you check back often because I'm constantly making updates to the guide. I'll give everyone a second here to check everything out. There's a question back there. Absolutely do. It's in the migration guide as well. One of the biggest offenders of size are going to be build history. A lot of people don't set retention policies. So I had one customer that had 600 gigabyte collection. They actually went back, I think they had it since like 2008. They went back and set retention policies, deleted up a lot of old build history that they don't need, and they got down to 150 gigs. Last but not least, please, please, please go ahead and evaluate this session. I love your feedback. I want to know what I can focus on and what I should focus more time on and how I can make this better. So we have about 13 minutes left. I'm open now to take questions. If you need to go, feel free to go. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to stay and answer. Yes?
So if you have developers in Europe, Asia, where should you migrate?
So the question is, what if I have developers in Europe, Asia, and the States? Where should I put this collection? This is a bit of a tricky one because the collection can only go in one location. So the best thing I can say is try to find a region that sits in between all of them and put it there. You could also consider potentially splitting the collections if there's like a product that only the Asia folks work on and a product that only the European folks work on, and then do separate imports to those respective regions. Yes?
We have a Git repository that's like several gigabytes in size, and if we do migrate, we're looking at doing builds on premise. Is there like a TFS proxy cache or something to reduce on like having to pull down that data from the network?
Yeah, so the same TFS, so the question was, we want to do a lot of builds on premise, and they want to know about the TFS proxy. The same proxy that you can use on TFS works on VSTS. So you can just reconfigure. So that's one thing you have to do post-import. You'll have to reconfigure the proxy. It might take a while for it to repopulate the caches and everything, but you can certainly use the TFS proxy on that. Yep. Yes?
You also have local build agents. If we're in VSTS, instead of, we're not going to be doing our builds locally, per se, but a VSTS build agent instead of local.
Gotcha. So the question was, can I have a build agent that is still on local on my own hardware, correct? Yes, that is the case. You can have two types of build agents. You can use the hosted agents that we provide, or you can still have private agents that you do. And one of the steps you'll have to do post-import is reconfigure your build agents to point towards your VSTS account once it's done. I think there was a question right behind you. Yep.
So is there anything that's not migrated? Like, I remember when we migrated from 2010 to 2012, it was certain links.
Mm-hmm. That is a very good question. So the question is everything migrated? Almost everything is, and we are closing the gap on that. So there are certain things, and the real struggle behind this, I will say, so release management's one of them, but that's going to be fixed in a couple weeks, actually. Package management, that's also going to be fixed in a couple weeks. And the real reason behind that is because when you think about TFS, it's one instance you deploy, everything's in one database. When you think about VSTS, it's a series of microservices. So it's really easy to wrap everything together and put the genie back in the bottle to go on-prem. But popping the genie out of the bottle, in other words, slicing up the data you give us and passing it off to those different microservices was a bit of an engineering challenge for us to tackle. So release management and package management and your extensions, you'll have to go reinstall post-import. But if you have like build configuration tasks in the new build system, that's fine. Like I said, release management, package management, they'll be closed out in the next couple of weeks, and you will have support for that, at least in a preview fashion. Everything else, though, is copied. So your work items, the same numbers, commits, check-ins, builds, dashboards, you name it. Yes, in the back. Ooh, 2 for 1.
We're on 2013 on-prem.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering, is there anything with statutes or anything that we need to be aware of, anything special we should look out for in migrating 2013 on-prem?
Gotcha. So I think the biggest thing for you is going to be going through the upgrades to get to 2017. As I'm sure you might or might not be aware, there was a large set of back-end data shape changes that occurred for TFS 2015 to support Team Project Rename and lay the ground foundation for project isolation. Specifically, it's called data space. That can, depending on the size of your collection, lead to a longer than normal upgrade time. And there is a tool that is called a pre-upgrade that will help insert a lot of that data ahead of time. And that's also referenced in the migration guide to kind of help you out there. One other thing that I'm sure Dan would probably want me to point out is that just coming from an older version, you might have processes that might need to be tweaked a little bit to meet the more modern standards on 2017.
Yeah, update your processes.
He has a t-shirt that says that. And you had another question, yes?
It's on my pillow.
Yes. That is a requirement, correct. So the question was, is Azure Active Directory a requirement for the import service? And it is yes. Yes? Like SharePoint document links you have in work items, they'll stay there. So we keep the links in the work items.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we literally just copy. So you have attachments on your work items as well, those are brought along. So if you went and attached like PowerPoint files, or if you have links off the SharePoint documents or other stuff, or like a cool cat GIF you found on the internet, that's all going to be there and available. Let me see. Yes?
How do you associate Azure AD accounts to MSDN subscriptions to make the import process go through so that the license type is associated?
That's a good question. So the question was about associating AAD accounts with their Visual Studio subscription, formerly called MSDN licenses, to ensure that I can take advantage of that license type. And that is covered in the migration guide. You do have to go link your work account, like your Microsoft type account, to your actual AAD account. And then when you sign in, you'll automatically be upgraded. So this is something you can test outside of the band of the import itself. You can do this on any account as long as you're able to sign in after doing that linking. And the migration guide, by the way, tells you where to go to do all this. So it's covered there via Millie. But once you do that, you can sign in, and as long as you get automatically upgraded on sign in to MSDN, then you're good to go, and then any future import, you'll be fine. Yes?
One other question is for the build artifacts, if it's being built in the cloud, you want to pull those down to your local on-site, is there any VPN or any type of support that you would have to do, or just do it through the UI, or if you wanted to have it more automated?
So your question is around having on-premises build agents and getting that configured with your VSTS account?
Or just using the build in the cloud and pulling the assets?
Yeah, I think if you're going to build and deploy locally, you would have a hosted, or I'm sorry, an on-premises build controller.
Okay.
That makes more sense than building it up here and then trying to push it down. Okay. Yeah. There's a
I wanna-
cursor way down there at the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to make sure I get to him in the end.
Post dry run, do we have access to all the features, specifically like the release and build agents to test dev deploys or QA deploys?
Absolutely. So the question was, post dry run import, do I have access to all the features, including build, release, and whatnot? And the answer is yes. Dry run accounts are basically exactly the same as production accounts, or any account you go and create on visualstudio.com. The only difference is they just have that expiry time, and they go away after a while. But otherwise, there's no functionality difference between the two. I'm going to, gentleman next to you. Yep.
In a single collection, for different projects, we have different work item templates, so migration is cry for it.
So repeat the question, sorry.
In a single collection, for different projects, we have different work item templates, customized ones.
Yep.
So a migration tool is pass it or.
Well, it depends on the customizations that you have, right? So when you run the tool, it'll go and check and see, do you have anything that's wacky in there? If you have something wacky in there, it'll tell you, and then you have to go fix.
Custom fields, drop-down values.
In general, all that stuff's supported, right? In general, but again, TFS Migrator will tell you if you have a problem. So that's the first step, but in general, like 90% of the things that you're doing, if you're just creating work item types and you're adding values to your list and fields, no problem. There's no problem.
I just want to see, is there anyone back over here that has a question? I know I've been looking over there a lot. Yes, sir.
You talked about you have to update your on-premise build and release agents. Do you have several hundred of them? Strict that? Or do you have to go to touch?
So the question was, you have to update your on-premises build and release agents, and can you script that? So by update, you will have to go and repoint them or configure them against your VSTS account. I'm not sure if that is scriptable. Generally, you do that from the UI in it, and you go and connect. So you're saying you have several hundred agents? That's a lot of agents. Interesting. If you have I'd be curious, maybe after the talk come up, I'll give you my email address. I can hook you up with the Chris Patterson, he's the build PM, and see if there's something you can do there to script that and make that a little bit easier for you. I think there might have been a question in the front row. Yes.
Yeah, when we moved from TFVC to Get, we lost like the ability to do check-in policies. And sort of work around that, we started hooking into like the pull request created notification events and everything. Can we still do that from in VSTS? Can we still hook into those, or is that removed?
So you're talking about, so the question was, we moved from TFVC to Get, and you lost the ability to do check-in policies, and you want to hook into notifications for check-ins. I'm assuming you're talking about like service hooks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, service hooks are still present in that, so they're still there. And also there's pull request policies as well that you can set up too to try and help with that as well. I'm going to see if there are any questions over on this side. I want to make sure I'm giving everyone equal amounts of attention. Yes, sir.
We've already established our account, we've already put on all of our users, we're already connected to AdReady and all that stuff that you can do. We just want to do this import now, is that going to cause some problems with that existing account?
No, the only thing is you're not going to be able to import into that existing account. It's going to create a brand new account, so you'll have two accounts at the end of this. You'll have the one that you spun up, I'm assuming you just went to like visualstudio.com and signed up for, and you'll have the one that was imported. But it won't impact the other account. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question about matching the users on on-premise and also AV.
Mm-hmm.
It's only matching based on receipt or is it using also the historical receipt?
It's just using the SID. It's using the SID, and it's looking for that SID as being in that on-premises security identifier property. Yep. Yes? That's a good question. So the question was about what happens to my SSRS reporting configurations. So that's one of the things that's covered in the migration guide. We don't actually, is the account done?
Account's done.
Account's done, yay, there we go, it worked. And you can see it's up there, pardon me?
I can help answer that one too in a minute.
Yeah, you can go ahead if you want
So
to.
yeah, so CSS, SSRS, not supported up in VSTS, right? And we'll have a better reporting solution coming. We're thinking near the end of the year, into early next year, that allow you to, it's basically the analytics service. So I don't know if you've heard about it, where it's an OData feed that sits on top of it. And then we're going to have that hooked in with Power BI, and we're going to allow you to create those views and things that you need, and hook that into Power BI and create your Power BI dashboards. It's basically the new reporting solution that will replace the SSRS and stuff eventually, right? It's what's up and. Okay.
No, you shouldn't run into
run
any
into
problems. It'll just ignore all that stuff. So you're good. Yep. I think there's a question in dead center here.
How heavy weight does it get? Like example, would you run it during the day against your live plot or?
Oh, absolutely. You remember Shell that I mentioned there? They ran that in the middle of their business day in Houston, Texas, and in Amsterdam, and it was totally fine. It's very low impact and everything, and it doesn't actually change anything. It just looks. It looks and scans. But of course, you can always run it after hours. You just kick it off and it goes, and there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, now the only
Yeah.
thing that gets interesting there is like, especially with process customization, you're going to start fixing all this stuff, and people are going to be using it. Like, what the heck? Why are things changing? Potentially, but that's the only risk that you probably run into. Yeah.
Yep. They're all brought over. Yes, right there. Unfortunately not. There is going to be a concept of organizations that'll be going into a preview very soon, and that's going to allow you to group them underneath a single organization. And there will be experiences over the next 6 to 8 months that roll out that will allow you to kind of easily transition between those accounts and permeate data from those accounts maybe to more of a centralized location to kind of understand what's going on, for your day across all those accounts. But at this time, there's no way to merge accounts together or collections together. Yes?
So for like the hosted XML? So yeah, so for hosted XML, it's the same concept, right? It's still XML files, but what you end up doing is the process is I go into a process page, I export it, and it basically gives me a package in a zip file, which is all the XML files. I'll make a change to it, zip it back up and import, and then the process is a system will check it to make sure you didn't screw anything up and make sure it's all good, and then it'll apply that to whatever projects it applies to. So it's still XML, but WIT admin is not supported. Yes, you would have to do it for each project. Now there are REST APIs to allow you to help automate some of this, but you would still have to Like you're probably talking about, hey, when I do a wood admin on a field change, it'll apply it to all of them, or I'd have to script it and run it for each individual project. Because the processes are at a project match, you have to do it for each project, yeah. So when you have a ton of projects, it's not fun. Yeah.
All right, so we are almost out of time, so I have time for one more question. Yes?
In the work item stuff, the hosted XML, can you control different like certain transitions and then change certain things?
Yes. So it still supports the transitions, and it still supports the rules in those transitions. Yeah, so I said earlier, the 4-knot rules we don't support necessarily out of box, but if you are a big collection and you're coming in, sometimes we're loosey-goosey on those rules. So if you run into that, you can email us at the email there and let us know, and we can work with you on it. Yeah.
All right, folks. Thanks. If you want to ask me some additional questions here afterwards out in the hallway, I'm more than happy to do that. Otherwise, please do the evaluations, and I hope to see you guys on VSTS very soon. Thank you.